Then there's California, a podcast featuring members of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus in conversation about their legislative priorities, their lives, their opinions, and perspectives that help make California exceptional. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. In 2023, for the first time in maybe more than a decade, California had to pare down its spending as it confronted a nearly $32 billion budget deficit. And the legislative year ended last fall with storm warnings about an even more severe state budget deficit for this upcoming fiscal year. And as days move on in 2024, the budget deficit news keeps getting worse. In January, the governor and the nonpartisan Legislative Analyst's Office pegged the 2024-2025 budget deficit at $58 billion, which was a grim enough figure to consider, especially after so many years of strong fiscal surplus. But in February, the LAO, as it's called, revised its figures to show a deficit $15 billion higher, $73 billion. Well, California has established a robust fiscal reserve to help us navigate through a lean budget time such as this. Unless state tax revenues pick up significantly this spring, this latest deficit figure just makes it all the more difficult to balance the budget without dipping further into the reserve and planning for targeted spending cuts. On this edition of Then There's California, we'll talk about the state budget and a few more topics closer to home and heart with a state senator who chairs one of the key state budget subcommittees tasked with overseeing the funding of state programs and services, whose purview is the health and livelihood of some of California's most marginalized and vulnerable communities that could potentially be impacted by reductions in state spending. Caroline Menjivar represents the 20th Senate District in the San Fernando Valley, including Van Nuys, Panorama City, Reseda, and Northridge. It is the valley that she has called home all of her life. Senator Menjivar is the daughter of Central American immigrants. She's a Marine veteran. She worked as an emergency first responder while going to college at Cal State Northridge. She has a master's in social welfare from UCLA. She is a member of the Legislative Latino and LGBTQ and Women's Caucus, an appointee to the Commission on the Status of Women and Children, and she is the first member of the LGBT community to represent the San Fernando Valley in the state legislature. Senator Menjivar continues this year as the chair of the Senate Budget Subcommittee on Health and Human Services, which makes her a perfect source for her perspectives on our state budget challenges. Senator Menjivar last joined us on this podcast just about a year ago in a get-to-know-you conversation with, at the time, a newly sworn-in lawmaker who, since the beginning, has embraced her 20th Senate District like it's part of her familia. And she shows up, showering her communities with policy and with pride. And guess what? She shows up for us, too. Glad to have you back again, Senator Menjivar.
Thank you so much, Brian. Sorry for that long-winded bio you had to do there. You
we
did it in one breath.
We want people to know who you are and what's going on. So how are you, by the way?
I'm doing really good. A little chilly.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think you reminded me we were here about a year ago, right?
Yes.
I feel definitely way more confident than a year ago, even just sitting here talking to you. Definitely different than last year.
Well, last time you remember we talked about Budget 101 and Housing 101 and Education 101, and it was like
we're
going
on
to school.
303 now. Jumped ahead.
So you're getting your master's in state legislature.
100%.
You remember also the last conversation, one of the first things I mentioned was everywhere I go, I mention your name and people are like, oh, she is delightful. She is wonderful. Well, I got to bring it up again at the start this year because no. Brian, what's your next podcast about? Oh, well, actually, we're going to talk to Senator Menjivar. Oh, we love her. She is so nice. We just love talking to her. So clearly the Senator Menjivar fan club is alive and well. What is your secret sauce?
So I will say, though, I am nice, but I know we're going to talk about the budget. That's where I'm not so nice, right? Because it's about protecting marginalized and vulnerable communities, and I can't be nice in that conversation.
Well, I think they appreciate your passion,
yes.
too.
I think, I don't know if it's... I mean, listen, I think if I was a legislator, if I would have became a legislator a year or 6 months after I got out of the Marine Corps, I'd really have a different personality because I was completely different. And I've shedded off that Marine Corps mentality as much as possible. And I was a little bit more tougher back then. But I think now I'm always constantly happy because I think I compare it to the difficulties of the Marine Corps, and I'm like, I had it harder back then. Or like I can adapt with things. Oh, I know things come out of left field. We just have to be Gumby.
Be flexible,
with it.
yes.
And be like, it's outside of my control. And also, I think all the therapy I've gone to in the past years have really helped me just have this different perspective and just be very like doesn't matter what's happening. You represent 1 million people in California as one of the youngest state senators ever to be in this space. So you cannot be happy if you're constantly thinking about stuff like that to be in this position.
So when we have that adage of things happen for a reason and the timing is right. So really this timing, you waited a while after you left the Marine Corps, that this really actually has probably put you in your best space for doing the work that you have to
100%.
do. Well, as I mentioned, you bring the passion and compassion to the businesses and the communities in your district. You've got town halls, you've got tours of small businesses, what are becoming now annual events. You are everywhere. Now you can say, well, that's part of the job. That's what you have to do in your district. But this district is your family.
You know, even though it is part of the job, not every elected official or not every politician does that, right? Because I'm not going to sit here, this is the podcast conversation between Brian and Caroline, not Caroline and talking about all other elected officials. So I don't want to put it in that way, but I, as a previous staffer, I saw elected officials that weren't always out in the community. And you can still see that across the United States or in LA County. But for me, it's fun. Like, I love doing that. I'm not a person that likes to just sit down. I need to read my books every week, and I love that. That's my leisure time. But if I'm not out in the community meeting new people, doing new things, I get really bored.
Okay.
And if I'm not out in the community, then what talking point am I going to bring up to Sacramento? The same talking point from 5 years ago, or every week I have new stories I can bring up from my district or wherever I go that is going to help push whatever policy I'm introducing here. Fresh, off the press, anecdotal stories that are happening in the moment. And I think that's one of the main reasons I got into this space, right? To just be that person that's going to go to all these things and bring up that information up to Sacramento.
And I remember you told me last time there were people in your district that are going, how does she have time to see us? How does she have time to work with us? Because she's busy. She's a lawmaker.
I got to give a lot of credit. I get a lot of compliments on my social media presence.
Yes.
But also, my communications team and my district reps are the ones really helping getting this content. Without them and my team, we wouldn't be able to fill up every day with something new or have to say, no, we can't post that because we've already posted so many different things. When I put together a team who are committed to the district and also look at this not just as a job, but something to really take advantage of, this opportunity to represent a community like ours.
And you're not just photoshopping yourself in. I mean,
Definitely
you're there,
not.
You're participating.
No. I don't even know how to use Photoshop.
For example, you got town halls that you've done on Care Court, and you were visiting businesses during Black History Month and the Herfluence for Women's History Month, which we are just starting.
Yes.
So it's not just a drop-in. These are events.
These are events. And my first big event last year was my Pride event. And I had colleagues, Assembly Member Jesse Gabriel, Senator Henry Stern, the Mayor Bass came to this event, County Supervisor Lindsay Horvath, and other council members and legislators came to my event and were like, this is 6 months into your term. How were you able to pull this off when you had over 500 people attend this event where we marched and had a block party? It was a testament to my team, but also the relationships that I had built in the community to say, hey, this has my name on it. You've seen my work already. You know this is going to be an amazing event. We did that. We did a Veterans Day event. We did my holiday event when I had the best Santa. We all know there's only one Santa, and he, took some time to come. He showed up. Yes, I used my own at-home decorations to come decorate my office to show like a part of me. My Herfluence event, we took young girls to ride horses. For the first time ever, so many girls had never been on a horse. And we used equine therapy to just empower them. Because when you're 85 pounds at 5'2" or what have you, and you get on a giant horse like that and you're feeling like, wow, I did this, that builds confidence in a young girl.
Absolutely.
So I'm just so happy with all the events we did last year.
One of your colleagues mentioned to me in a podcast we did last fall that while it is important and valuable to represent, to check all the boxes, so to speak, you also have to put in the work, that you have to be out there for the communities, and the communities need to see you putting in the work and investing in them. And you're actually doing that.
Yes. So even though I'm not on the ballot this year, because luckily 4-year terms and I love those, I don't want to be a year before my reelection and then start changing. Right? I want this to be year 1 through year 12 I just don't want to be that person that people talk about, oh, now she's out in the community because she's out in the ballot.
Right. And you'll already, by the next election, you'll already have a track record. And that's the thing.
100%.
You're showing up for them. This isn't just calculated showing up for election reasons, that kind of thing. Yeah. This may be inside baseball, but things here up in Sacramento, you have a new leader, Senator Mike McGuire. How's that feeling? When
I first met Senator McGuire, I think like a month in, we went to dinner, we spoke. It was the first time I've ever heard him speak. And it just felt very relaxed. And his speed, I like his speed because I have that speed and I match it. I like going fast. I like things to go fast. I like things to be organized. I love his organized, fast-paced manner. And in fact, he brought me in to be a presiding officer. So I started training earlier today.
You get to be an MC.
I get to be an MC. Yes. So I'm excited about that. So everything's been going really great. I appreciate how he is really involved with the caucus, where, we get to hear him, what he's really thinking each time we have caucus meetings. And he still doesn't sit down during sessions. So I still think he is his own majority leader and his own assistant majority leader, definitely.
They call him the Energizer Bunny, but to some degree, you are too.
Maybe I can sit down. I will say that. Yes, I definitely can sit down, but I like being on the go. So I can respect that from him.
Let's talk about some of your legislation here for 2024. Looking at this final year, you've introduced 21 bills focused on the themes of protecting vulnerable communities, consumer protection, and environmental justice. And makes sense. But how are you looking at how those priorities will affect the state at large, but in particular your district?
Last year I did 16 bills and only 4 got signed by the governor. Rough. That was rough, right?
I wanted to talk to you about that.
Yeah, we could definitely dive into the sad part afterwards. But let's talk about these 21 bills that I feel way more thrilled this year than last year. All bills are created equal. They're all lovely. But this year, there's a different kind of like, oh my gosh, these are really heavy hitters. These are really going to create direct impact in my districts. And in fact, a lot of them came out of issues that were impacting my direct district. So this is the first year. I mean, I say that as if I've been here for 5 years. But this year, I am proud to say that these bills will have a direct impact, not just on California, but my district.
Well, let's talk about, for example, vulnerable communities, sort of a lightning round of a few of these. Period equity, which is an important piece of legislation and policy affording accessing feminine products, and also removing the stigma that here, even in 2024, still surrounds the menstrual cycle.
Brian, I just don't get it. Do people really think this is an option for us? I just don't understand. Why is it that I am so glad we removed the tax. I'm so glad we offer it in a lot of schools. And even then, some schools aren't offering it, even though they're supposed to. But why is this not a medical equipment or a medical item, right? So this goal of this bill is to ensure that we get a Medi-Cal waiver, at least for Medi-Cal beneficiaries, to claim this as a medical device and get reimbursed through their insurance. Point blank, this isn't something that a family, a parent should look at and say, you know what, this is going to be at the bottom of the list because I can't afford this month. We're going to pay for food instead. Those stories are still happening, and I'm so glad that youth are leading this effort. So that's one of my bills, protecting vulnerable communities, but I also have some for children between 0 and 5 about developmental screenings.
Yes.
And I have 2 bills related to the individuals with developmental disability around screenings to ensure they get screenings before, it's not that it's too late, but in time to get the resources necessary so we don't miss a month. 1 month of speech therapy, of OT, makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've had a family come to my sub-3 hearing say that their kid became verbal at 19 years old because they didn't get services until they were a teenager. As a parent, to hear your voice speak for the first time 19 years later, I can't even imagine that because they weren't able to obtain services. So if a kid at 7 months, 8 months, 1 year can be diagnosed and start treatment, they have a better chance to meet their developmental milestones. So we're going to be looking at how we can streamline that and create MOUs with childcare providers and be those caseworkers. Additionally, we want to make sure that when you are within the program of the regional center, that you go through with SB 1281, the self-determination program. That means you, Brian, you come to me, the regional centers, and you tell me, Caroline, this is what I need. this was going to help me. This is how I will feel successful. What vendor I want to utilize. Because if you don't do that, what the regional center does is like, okay, Brian, I think this is what he would like. Here you go.
So it gives the client some agency and ownership in their own care.
Self-determination. I would determine on my own, given my mental capacity, what is going to be best for me. In fact, last year, I had a similar bill related to the MOUs, and it didn't work out. So we came back with a fresh approach to it that tied with my other self-determination program is really looking to ensure that we have the tools necessary for this population. And I'll continue to have hearings on this topic in sub 3. It's both personal to me because I have an autistic blood niece and autistic by marriage nephew. So I see this day in, day out of the lack of support that these families get.
And isn't that a great feeling as a lawmaker to be able to say, I can affect change in these people's lives with this kind of legislation?
Oh my God. I mean, there are two things I didn't know I was going to be working on when I became a legislator. And the population of individuals with developmental disability was one of them. And the second one was juvenile justice. So those two topics have really surprised me. And I've deeply fallen in love with the topic, but simultaneously have become more frustrated and angry with the system on it.
Well, I wish you luck with moving these forward. Consumer protection is another headline. You have SB 1103 and SB 1142, commercial lease transparency and utility reconnection, which sound a little dry at the front, but again, they affect consumers and their daily lives. Tell me about those bills.
You know, this isn't the utility reconnection fees. It doesn't have a sexy headline, but what it does do on the back end is really help people save money and be able to get power back on. Because what we're seeing right now is I do not pay a bill, right? And I owe $500 and they cut off my power. And I call and say, okay, I have like 250, please, I need the power. I need water. I have kids. They're like, okay, that's fine. But on top of that, you need to pay the $500 plus $150 to reconnect. If you see them already struggling to get power back on, how do you think I'm going to come up with an extra $150? And then we're going to have these families be without power and water? So it doesn't have a sexy title, but it does help people stay connected to water and power and find a way to not further criminalize poverty. Now, under consumer protection, I also want to talk about one that is for veterans. I'm partnering with the AG on this because what we're seeing is that some bad players are essentially robbing veterans, asking for an enormous amount of dollars to help get them connected to veteran benefits. The system is daunting. I went through that. And I actually hired an entity to help me navigate it because the VA system was just denying all my claims. They're like, oh, that hurts? Nah, that didn't happen in the military. Oh, you broke that? That didn't happen in the military. You know, it was just very difficult to get connected to my benefits. So I did have to hire someone and I did pay. My story was a positive one where I didn't get charged too much and I got the results that I wanted. But other veterans, their money gets stolen. They get lied to. Their information gets stolen. So we want to make sure we're protecting our veterans against those bad actors. And with the AG, we're looking to put only accredited claim agents in this business to support veterans. I'm really excited about that one.
Quick sidebar on that. I know your time in the military, I guess the way to say this is that all of the legislation that you author for veterans has a personal touch to it.
Yes, of course.
I mean, explain a little bit about that, being in the military, being in the Marines, and just now, fast forward to your time as a lawmaker, being able to help your fellow veterans.
Yes. I mean, I attribute a lot of my success to my 7 years in the Marine Corps, close to 7.5 years. One being driven, leadership skills, adaptability, patience. Like I mentioned earlier, like nothing really that happens now is as bad as being in the Marine Corps and getting yelled at, literally yelled at or kicked or thrown sand at or anything like that, or having to run 10 miles. Like that's, I mean, I miss it, but I don't miss it, right? So the things that I do, I think through that lens, being able to work with all types of people, because in the Marine Corps, I was the platoon sergeant where I led 50 Marines from across the United States. So I had to find a way to connect with someone from Kentucky, from Florida to San Diego. We all had different personalities and different likes. And somehow none of that mattered because we had a mission and we accomplished the mission. When they put you in a mountain and they give you a compass and a map and they say, figure it out, you can't use your phones, I think you accomplish anything after that, right? If you find your way back. So I think about that in everything that I do now. on how to further protect my veterans. Always will have a soft spot. You know, stay tuned. We're going to be doing some things for our veterans this year because I think our state legislature doesn't do really anything for veterans. I'm looking to create a veteran caucus as well to add to my resume of 3 caucuses plus another one, 4. I'm looking to do something for Memorial Day on the floor as well. I just will always have a soft spot for veterans and everything that they do. If you've never seen it, you just wouldn't understand, you know, so always very proud to lead with that identity.
Well, that final headline of environmental justice, you have the bill on leaded the aviation fuel ban, and then also the Polluters Pay Climate Fund. These are actually key to the Valley, not just to California.
Yes. So SB 1193 is, I think, my biggest priority of this year. Is to remove avgas, leaded aviation fuel, and phase it out. This came out, originally it was an author-sponsored bill. Had no sponsors on it because I was like, I need to do this. And the LA Times article came out noting all the highest polluting airports in California, with one of my districts being on the top 5. Right now, Van Nuys Airport sits number 2 as the worst airports in California, with Long Beach being number 1. Of how much it was polluting the air and the dire impacts on kids, because we saw that kids around those airports had a 21% increase in lead in their blood, right? And we know there's no safe level to have of lead. So you can say, oh, you can have 0.5. No, 0.08. There's no safe level of lead exposure. So we want to phase that out. It's phased out of paint. It's phased out of gas fuel. Why not this? I have 3 airports in my district. No other member has 3 airports within a 10-mile radius. The environmental injustices in my district, we can talk about it through this whole podcast. So I'm excited about this. I held my first press conference in my district related to this. I've got the support of local elected officials from council to county supervisors, and we're going to get this done. You know, we're talking to the opposition, how to make this work. But bottom line, this is a public health issue. With all due respect, that's a hobby to fly these planes. And my kids are being stuck with asthma, with brain damage, and all other health impacts. So it's hard for me to look at this and say, well, one cannot, no, that's a hobby. You don't really need to do that. But we'll work with you because it looks like it's a fun hobby. But I want to make sure we're protecting our communities.
Well, and to the point then, SB 1497, the Polluters Pay Climate Fund. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is a challenge because these type of legislation, particularly when it comes to environmental issues, are not easy to get through. But how do you want to hold these polluters accountable?
And you're right. Even if you do get it passed, litigation tends to hit, right? Senator Gonzalez has litigation on her 3,200 feet bill. Senator Wiener, last year's bill on the accountability part for corporations is hitting litigation issues. So it seems like, you're always going to see these businesses have deep pockets to be able to fight this, right? But we're really shifting. We're really shifting in where we're saying enough is enough. And if you're going to talk to any of these Gen Zers, like, they're tired. They are dead tired. Each generation that's moving forward, we're inching closer and closer to be more and more radical on these EJ things. And so this Polluters Pay bill, it's still really being molded. There's not much I can say on that or how the methodology is going to look like. We're taking a lot of our cues from the U.S. Senate. They also introduced a similar bill. I believe it was Senator Elizabeth Warren who did this. And we're working with the Jane Fonda Foundation, who's, she's on the forefront.
She's very active.
Very, very active.
On environmental
very
issues.
much, we're partnering with her and really seeing how we can craft this bill. And I'm realistic. If it doesn't happen this year, it doesn't happen this year. I know that I've seen members who it's their 4th, 5th year introducing the same bill. It just takes some time, but we need to have that conversation.
Let's go back real quick to 2023. You brought it up. You had this sterling package of legislation last year, including the bill allowing hearing aids for anyone 21 years of age or under.
Yeah.
And all these bills vetoed. Now, the Caroline Menjivar I know is able to find the good in the difficult, but I can imagine how hard that was to see part of your bill package, poof, it's vetoed by the governor for whatever reasons. Mm-hmm. Talk about dealing with that, coming back this year, how that framed your legislative plans for this year. It must have been hard. It's like when you see this, you do all this work, the bills get out of the legislature to the governor. It's like, Why am I here?
So I would describe myself going through the legislative process last year as a golden retriever. Where I was like, oh my God, I got it out of the Senate committee hearing. Oh, I got it. We got it off the Senate floor. That doesn't matter. I've learned that the first part does not matter, that your own house is always nicer to you, and that the big fight starts after house of origin. So this time moving forward with all my bills, I'm saying, okay, yeah, sure. Don't get too excited because the hard part hasn't started. You're invested for 9 months. You go through all that. Sometimes you get 0 no votes, just like the hearing aids, 0 no votes. You get it to the governor's office. You've had the best campaign around it. Children coming and lobbying, and you get a veto on that? That broke my heart. I was at Lowe's shopping for Christmas gifts, the funnest thing I could do. And I get that call that it was vetoed. My wife finds me on a chair, distraught how upset I was, because I got off the phone at Lowe's and I just sat down in like the patio area, just staring at a wall. I was like, how are we going to veto hearing aids for kids? And it wasn't even a money thing. There was no reason this would have saved the state money, in fact. So how I'm looking at it this year is how to be more strategic, especially being on the budget. I am not, I wouldn't say ignorant, but it is hard to introduce bills on the budget because you know really what is happening, right? So it's hard for me to introduce bills with a high price tag and act like, oh, maybe we'll find money, because I already know there's like no money, right? So I'm being more strategic about it. Am I using some of these bills to start conversations? Yes. Do I recognize that I just need to get something across and I could make it skinnier? Yes. Am I not going to be as attached? I'm not going to be as attached. So I'm definitely not a golden retriever anymore when it comes to my bills.
Wow. There's a few of them that you've brought back that were vetoed last year.
Yes.
The youth health and equity safety condoms, and then the infertility treatment coverage.
Yes.
Are you bringing back the hearing aid bill? I haven't seen the reintroduction notice on that.
I did not bring it back. In fact, Senator Eggman is going to be working on something to help that fact. And I know Assemblymember Weber is also interested in that way. And I think they have or are about to have a hearing in her sub-health hearing in the Assembly. Senator Eggman introduced a bill to help with the benchmarks to be able to include this to our state exchange health benefit. So there's some steps we're moving forward. We just are not going to introduce the same exact bill.
Good to know. Well, I know you're not a golden retriever anymore, but obviously you're going in with your eyes wider open this year.
That's why my SB 729 IVF is important, right? Look what happened in Alabama and what could happen everywhere.
Unbelievable.
And, I just don't understand how we're behind 14 states in requiring access to IVF services. It's discriminatory on so many levels. It's impacting cancer survivors, female residents who have to wait 10 years after to start a family because they're going through med school and all of that. LGBTQ plus communities. So, I think now is the time more than ever to really lead if we want to say that we're the leaders on reproductive justice.
And see, you come back here in 2024 with the fire lit even a little brighter.
With a vengeance.
Yeah, with a vengeance. We'll hear about that. We'll get updates on that later. All right, let's talk about the state budget. You are chair of the budget subcommittee dealing with health and human services, a key budget committee as we move through this process. Right. The governor introduced his budget in January, but the storm warnings were already there last year with last year's budget deficit. Yeah. We have been smart as a state in the past decade, saving money for a rainy day. We've learned our lesson from the past when we went hog wild during surpluses and then we find ourselves at a fiscal cliff. So that's going to help us, but there's going to have to be some strategic cuts in there.
There is.
As chair of the budget committee, what's your perspective on this?
My perspective is that we're dealing with children, foster kids, seniors, healthcare. We shouldn't be cutting sub 3, but I'm also realistic. We have to do some things, but I am appalled at the things that the administration proposed to cut or delay. In fact, certain areas under human services are unique in that their majority of the cuts are from human services for CalWorks and for CalWork families and foster kids. That's where majority of the cuts are coming from. So I'm trying to figure out as to why the administration felt that this is where we should cut. The safety net reserve was created under, I believe, Senator Holly Mitchell to create this reserve to help with Medi-Cal and CalWorks. We're going to deplete that. Then what are we going to do for the upcoming years? the governor leaves in 3 years or 2 years, I'm going to be here past that and have to be dealing with families saying, hey, what happened to the investments in our families? That's gone. The members that are going to be here with us for the past this administration really need to think about what we're really going to be leaving for our future selves and dealing with the ongoing budget deficits we're going to deal with. So I've been standing firm on not having any cuts to our vulnerable communities, because in fact, we're going to have to pay even more later down the line. If we don't invest in homelessness prevention for foster youth or former foster youth, we're going to have to pay 3 times that more for homeless services. If we don't invest in CalWorks families to stabilize a family, they're going to pay more for that when they're asking for XYZ state services. All these are preventative measures. The lack of Medi-Cal reimbursements in a long list of medical things, it's absurd to me because this is preventative measures. The fact that we're paying for more funding for kids with complex needs to be in hospitals versus at-home care, where it's 3 times more expensive, makes no sense to me, where in fact we can just raise Medi-Cal rates. Brian, I would say from the conversation that we had last year, I have dived in. I have read more things that I've ever read in my entire academic career, because I feel like I have to be really prepared when I have Department of Finance in front of me and the administration saying, I think we should deplete the program for foster youth subsidies. I think we need to delete CalWorks. I want to be ready to say no, and this is why, and these are the numbers. This is how many people it serves and the success of it. So when it comes to human services, I am going to bat with the biggest bat ever I can to ensure that we're protecting these services, but also being creative and saying you can cut from all these other places. And I have a list of things that we can cut that is not going to impact foster kids, older populations. So I'm ready with that list, and we'll be submitting it to our leadership, budget chair, and so forth to say, not only am I saying don't cut, but I'm saying these are the solutions instead to keep these programs afloat. Additionally, when it comes to the health aspect of it, this is the first year of Medi-Cal for all, where we close that gap, right? The MCO tax is a big topic that I've really dived into. I've been vocal about my frustration about who is benefiting from that. I am here to not pick winners and losers. I think a lot of people can be winners, but when you only have a handful of winners, that means that we didn't craft a really good plan, right? So I've been vocal about seeing how we can rearrange some of that funding. And I know me saying this again is going to ruffle some feathers, but I'm here to represent those that don't have the deep pockets to have the highest paying lobbyists lobbying on behalf of their cause, right? I'm here for the private duty nursings, the congregate living facilities, the kids with complex needs who need access to dental care and so forth with the rates increase. This is my favorite topic. I love the budget. I wish it was more transparent. And I'm trying everything I can to bring that transparency to this process.
But those that testify to your committee this budget season are on notice.
And one last thing I'll say on this, because this is really my favorite topic.
Yes, no, I love to see you on fire about these things.
In my hearings, and I'll say that, I'll say, if I don't have an answer, I think last week I said, well, then why didn't I have the person in front of me that had answers to this? You know, like I'm just getting a little bit more confident in the things that I say, because we should, as legislators, demand on that spot their answers to these questions. And I'm really tired of hearing, oh, we're having internal conversations. What internal conversations? We're the legislators. We should be purview to all those internal conversations because it deals with us approving XYZ. So trying to figure out what internal roundtable I need to be a part of to get these things moving. I will say there is a lot more collaboration now with my assembly counterparts. Like Assemblymember Jackson and I are always like, are we on the same track on this, that we're going to fight for the same thing? From budget to just a couple of more things here. Okay. Culture wars. I have Caroline Menjivar in front of me, and I want to talk about this. Classrooms across the country have been in the bullseye of our country's current culture wars. California is no exception. School boards, schools in our districts are in the middle of book bans, parental rights debates, and especially the safety of LGBTQ students. There was a school in your district last year, Saticoy Elementary, where there was a big demonstration. So it's obvious that these policies and these local reactionary mandates are endangering LGBTQ students, but even if a couple of your Republican colleagues are supporting the parental notification. And clearly, as an example, there's so many of these young LGBTQ young people who are away from home, which shows you there's still a lot of parents that aren't listening to their children. Yeah, gosh, I've never seen it this bad. since Prop 8. And I think this is worse because Prop 8 focused on just marriage inequality. And what we've been seeing for the past year and a half or so is an attack on an array of things within the LGBTQ plus community, from the trans kid Nex in Oklahoma dying as a result. We're going to say this. It has to, as a result of what happened the day before to them, to TGI kids being outed, to recently, a couple of days ago, a judge allowing 2 school districts to move forward with their outing process. It is so scary. I visited a organization in my district just last weekend, Bienestar, who focuses on working with TGI, LGBTQ plus people who just got to America. And I asked them, what are we seeing? Are we seeing a decrease in the amount of people crossing our border for asylum to seek care because of what's happening in the United States? And said no, because even what's happening in the States compared to everywhere else, it's worse. So we are receiving an influx of people who are HIV positive, trans women coming to California seeking for care. And when they're getting here, we're having Republicans, school districts saying, like, your existence is not allowed here, right? Every day I'm trying to ask myself, like, why does it bother you that I like the color purple? How does that impact your life? What effect does my liking color purple have on your day in and day out? When you're brushing your teeth, when you're eating breakfast, how does that impact you? I'm trying to figure it out. And I think that frustrates me more because I need answers to my questions. And that's just the way I am for everything. And if 2 + 2 is equaling 5 right now, I don't understand why. And I need to know why we can't have 2 + 2 = 4 in this situation. It's been so frustrating. Our caucus has been up and down California with a world tour that we've been doing, trying to figure out how we can uplift policies. We're going to be having a conference with Arizona and Nevada in May about how we can join together as states with our different LGBTQ caucuses to really come together to elevate what kind of policy. Our caucus is going to be initiating a bill related to this, and it's still in the works. We did a poll on this to see how people feel about having kids be outed, but I think just it's some of the myths, because people really think that at 5 years old, someone can go to the doctors and say, I want gender affirming care right now. It just baffles me that common sense has just gone out the window, and people really think that we're having kids getting gender affirming surgery at 5 years old without parental consent. Like, this involves a conversation with their parent every single time, right? So you can't, it's so sad to see what is happening to my community. It's so sad to see that in 6 months from now, or no, where are we, 8 months from now, or come November, that we can endure potentially 4 years of Supreme Court in just Washington, D.C. packages of hurtful legislation and rulings that are really going to impact my life.
And knowing it's all by design.
And it is all by design. Because in my friend group, we are a group of 4 lesbian couples, so it's like 8 of us. I think I need to diversify my friend group to some heterosexuals, but we have these conversations about, like, what would you do? Would you leave? Would you leave California? Would you go somewhere else? Because honestly, where would I, like, if you really, like, in 4 years, accept the fact that you can potentially be really inched out for who you love, like, that's a scary feeling. Outside of people who deal with, like, racial issues, people really understand or grasp that feeling of, like, what if I'm really not accepted in 4 years or in 2 years once the new administration, if a new administration comes into the United States, right? So it's just a scary feeling, but I feel very united with our caucus, with the mission of what we're going to be doing. We have a new advisory council that we created for California on LGBTQ plus issues.
Right.
So, I mean,
is that the Project Rainbow that we've heard about, or is that something? Because I know that group has come out with.
There's another group called Project Rainbow that sent us, like, a couple of ideas of what we can do. I took one of those recommendations, and it's one of my bills on creating a TGI website, just like we have abortion.ca.gov, just bringing more resources. These are kids we're talking about. These are kids are being told that they are not worthy. These are kids that are hearing day in and day out, on Fox News, out of Andrew Tate, out of all these other horrific people, that they don't matter. How would you feel as a 11-year-old kid who is navigating your sexuality or just your identity or hormones, that what you're seeing on TV is that you don't belong here? Like it's a lot to take in. And it's a lot to just consider whether you want to start a family or not. Are you going to be at risk more? Is your kid going to be at risk more? So it's really crazy times, and I'm really scared for November.
Well, crazy times sometimes put certain people in places where they have the opportunity to do something. And I know it's not all on your shoulders, but it's good you are where you are.
Or just protect California as much as possible, against all the crazies.
Notwithstanding everything we've talked about here, from budget to culture wars to your bill package, any other issues you want to elevate through the year that you want to bring attention to for the world to notice?
I think, the big topics that I'm so glad that I'm working on that are having a nationwide effect, or it could have an impact, is the IVF services, leaded fuel, because the FAA potentially is working on something for 2030. So it's on a national level of conversation. My events that I talked about, really excited about them. And then Pride even more than ever. I keep saying that it's no longer a celebration. It's kind of like just like an existence. Like we're marching for our right to exist and to breathe on the same planet as everyone else. And just really looking to utilizing that platform to elevate more queer people to be in these positions. Because there's a possibility that come the new session next year, or December 5th, when people get sworn in, that I will be the only lesbian in the state legislature. We're losing 2 power lesbians, Senator Eggman, Senator Atkins. And if Assemblymember Cervantes does not win, I would be the only lesbian left. And I can't have that. I need, to ensure that we're building this, not that we're building a bench, but like we're opening doors for queer women also to be in these spaces to help push this mission of just protecting our most vulnerable.
I'm glad you're here. Glad you're able to speak up about this. It meant a lot. It touched me a lot, the conversation that we had last time, the things that you shared with me. And I think it touched a lot of people who listened. And last month, I was watching the Grammy Awards, and I thought about you. There was a scenario where Tracy Chapman, the 90s singer,
I love her.
Well, good to know that. She did her song, Fast Car with Luke Combs,
yes.
a white country and western singer.
Yes.
And here she is, 2024. She's singing. She's got her heart out. A woman of color, a lesbian. But it made me think back, and it was interesting. A LA Times columnist wrote about this. It's like he followed the same wavelength. It made me think back to the 90s when she was at her peak and first singing, and she was free to be herself, but she was not. She wasn't attacked for being gay, her record sales, but she could not be proud. She could not stand out. And same with Melissa Etheridge and Luther Vandross and some others that were gay, but they couldn't celebrate it in the 90s. You talk about don't ask, don't tell in the military, kind of in the entertainment world too. Some of them were outed by their fans, by family members. It was not a pretty time. But here she is, 2024, singing with a white country western singer, singing her song. She's feeling proud. She's able to be who she is. She doesn't have to change anything. She doesn't have to compromise. But it made me think too, just about you coming out twice and the challenges. And here we are in 2024. It's easier, but it's still a challenge.
Yeah.
There was the 80s, there was the 90s, so much more transparency, so much more comfort level, free to be. And yet, as we've been talking about, not so. What's your perspective?
I think my generation demands more. I say this in the way that we thought by this point everything would be great. Where versus the older generation is like, they see the progress, right? I wasn't born in the time where I was born in the 80s, but wasn't like a teenager. I didn't see how bad it was back then, right? So I went through this process of it should be good. Why is it not good right now? So I demand more, and I'm not accepting the breadcrumbs. Like I'm sick and tired of the breadcrumbs. That's not what I want. And I turned 35 this year, and I feel like it's 35 going on like 45 in terms of my mentality. Maybe my body too, because everything aches. But I don't give up anymore, right? Like you need to accept me, And even with my family, it's still in day and day out. Like this is, I laugh when you say you've come out twice. Like I think I've come out like 500,000 times. Like every single time it's like, oh, and I'm
well,
lesbian.
But having to draw a line in the sand with your family to say you accept me as I am or you don't accept me.
So, you know, in having conversations with my wife about maybe starting a family, the things you have to think about that other people don't. If I start a family, will my mom stop talking to me? Will my mom accept this kid? Will she look at this kid as her grandchild the same way she does her other 2 grandchildren? Will she invest all the time into this kid like she does with my other nieces? Those are questions that even at my age can humble you, can make you go back to being 16 years old and be very scared of, do I not want to do this because I don't want to put myself in that situation because I won't be able to handle it? Or will I be able to handle losing my family because this is a thing they really can't see? Or me and my wife trying to renew our vows in a couple years and thinking, is this going to be another repeat of them not coming to another wedding? Or do we think we've gotten past that and this is an opportunity for them to fix their errors and now come to our vow renewers, right? Those are constant things that any LGBTQ plus person at whatever age will feel like they're still a teenager back in their parents' home going through the coming out process. So it's like having to come out every single time if I talk about doing something different outside of what they accept now, right? Because at least they can see me and my wife together, just standing next to each other. And it causes, it's things that queer couples can build resentment towards their partners if one is more out than the other, or just navigating that. It's never ending. So while I get so excited that I see the Tracy Chapmans of the world coming out here and being out, Jodie Foster and so forth, it is still very like the 80s for a lot of other queer people, especially in communities of color. Whenever my mom feels like saying a comment, it's like, okay, let me push this back, right? Or pretend I get the confidence of a chair person, or the confidence I have here when I'm a chair to be with to respond to your family members. So Brian, I'm excited. I'm thankful for everything we've gotten, but it shouldn't be, I should not have to thank someone for just being a freaking decent human being, right? Like you don't get a cookie for being, no one deserves a cookie just to be a nice person. Like I didn't ask to be born. If a parent wants to be a parent, that they ask to love a child unconditionally, no matter what. I mean, yeah.
I appreciate you sharing this. I know it's a lot on the plate and a lot on the heart.
Yes.
Even here in these times when you are so much more free, as they say, but the challenges, the difficulties, even on a personal level are always there.
Yeah. I think that's why a lot of people, when you see them like always on the go, I learned this in social work. It's because like, if you stop, that means like your demons come out, or like your negative thoughts come out. So a lot of people who are always on the go, it's usually because they're trying to just not think about something, or like focus on other things, or be alone with their thoughts.
So it helps us if we pay attention to each other a little bit more too, as well.
It does, yeah.
Thank you very much for being so candid and for sharing what you've shared, and good luck with this year.
Are we going to do this tradition every single year to see how it goes?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to have you back. So absolutely.
We'll write a book at the end.
Yes, absolutely. We'll write a book at the end. Just progress. That's
there
what we're looking
progress,
for.
Yeah.
No, seriously, glad you are where you are, and thank you for joining us.
Thank
and good
you
luck
so
with everything.
much.
Good to see you. Senator Caroline Menjivar, chair of the Senate Budget Subcommittee on Health and Human Services, representing the 20th Senate District in the San Fernando Valley. And that brings us to a close of this edition of Then There's California. We're a production of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus, with technical assistance and production support from John Roman, Ben Abaya, Brian Shadden, Michelle Baker, Sergio Reyes, McLeana Woods, and the graphic artistry of Tim Davis. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. Thanks for listening to Then There's California.